The chamber was buzzing with restless energy, cameras clicking like a swarm of locusts. Elon Musk leaned into the microphone, his voice carrying a mix of impatience and defiance. "What we're witnessing is government at its worst," he declared, his tone sharper than steel. "Overreach, bureaucracy, red tape, Washington suffocates innovation. I've built companies that touch the stars, and yet here I sit, shackled by people who've never created a thing." The room stirred. Some smirked in agreement, others clenched their jaws. Musk's presence alone was a spectacle. Billionaire, innovator, provocateur. Every sentence was designed to belittle the very institution he was standing in. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing headlines being born. The air grew thick with tension, as if everyone was waiting to see who, if anyone, would dare challenge him. Then, from across the table, Jasmine Crockett shifted in her seat. Her expression was steady, almost serene. She let Musk's rant hang in the air just long enough for the arrogance to fully register. And then, in a tone so calm, it cut sharper than a shout. She spoke. "Mr. Musk," she said, her voice ringing clear through the chamber. "God, if government is such a burden, why do your rockets keep landing on taxpayer money?" The words dropped, like a gavel. For a moment, silence swallowed the entire room. Reporters froze mid-sentence. Senators blinked in disbelief. Musk's mouth hung open, his swagger interrupted. Cameras zoomed in, desperate to capture his reaction. The mighty billionaire, who moments ago commanded the room with his bravado, suddenly seemed smaller, exposed. The audience felt the shift instantly. A ripple of suppressed laughter coursed through the chamber, checked only by the weight of the setting. On social media, clips would soon explode with hashtags. But in that instant, inside that room, no one dared to break the spell of Crockett's composure. Her line wasn't loud, wasn't angry, but it was precise, and the precision is what stung. Musk, the master of clapbacks online, had been silenced. In real life, before the nation, by a single surgical remark, the chamber's silence was deafening. Everyone knew more was coming, but no one knew just how much this single moment would ignite. And as Crockett leaned back in her chair, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at her lips, the question hovered like a storm cloud. What would happen? Next, for a moment, that one line from Jasmine Crockett seemed to hang in the air like a lightning strike. But to understand why it mattered, why the silence in that chamber carried such weight, you have to step back. This wasn't just about one billionaire sparring with one congresswoman. This was about something far bigger. America has always wrestled with the question of power. Who holds it, who abuses it, and who has the courage to stand against it? On one side of this clash stood Elon Musk, world's richest man, a symbol of unchecked wealth, arrogance, and the idea that brilliance excuses everything. On the other stood Jasmine Crockett, congresswoman not born into privilege, but molded by struggle. Someone who wore dignity and service like armor. This wasn't just Musk defending his empire. It was the face of big tech accountability colliding. With the spirit of democratic responsibility, Musk came armed with his usual playbook: mock the process, belittle the public servants, and frame himself as a genius persecuted by bureaucrats too small to understand him. And usually, it worked. Usually, no one dared to pierce the armor of his influence, but not this time. Crockett's one-liner was more than a quip. It was a crack in the facade. Suddenly, the room wasn't just listening to Musk's grandstanding. They were questioning it, were forced to confront the uncomfortable truth behind the rockets, the cars, and the bravado. Musk's empire had been fueled again and again by public money, by taxpayer trust, and by a system he mocked while cashing its checks. And that's why this mattered. This wasn't merely a verbal joust. It was democracy reminding wealth that it still has a voice. It was a test of whether dignity could cut through arrogance in a space where arrogance usually wins. The tension in the chamber was thick because everyone understood the stakes. For years, billionaires like Musk had danced around accountability, using charisma and spectacle as shields. But here, in front of the cameras, in front of the nation, the shield had cracked. Social media was already stirring. Clips of Crockett's line were spreading like sparks on dry brush. Commentators whispered that a shift was coming not just in the hearing room but in the culture itself. For the first time in a long time, someone had made Musk look human, vulnerable, and yet the silence wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Because if Crockett could land one blow so cleanly, what would happen if she pressed further? What would happen if she turned this moment into a movement? The audience didn't just want an answer, they craved it. And so, the stage was set. The world leaned closer, waiting. What happened next would shake not just Congress, but the entire internet. For years, Elon Musk has cultivated an image not just as a businessman, but as something larger than life, a maverick genius who bends industries to his will. Rockets, electric cars, satellites in orbit. Musk sells himself as the man carrying humanity into the future. And yet for every innovation, there's an equal and opposite force. His arrogance, his defiance, and his deep belief that rules are for lesser men. His rise was built on spectacle as much as science. Musk didn't simply launch rockets. He live-streamed them like Hollywood blockbusters. He didn't just sell cars. He branded them as a revolution. To millions, he became an icon. But with icon status came ego, and ego quickly turned to disdain for anyone who dared to question him. When Musk purchased Twitter, later rebranded X, he claimed it was about freedom. The town square of democracy, he declared. But in practice, the acquisition became less about protecting speech and more about showcasing dominance. Overnight, rules shifted to fit his whims. Voices critical of Musk found themselves suspended or throttled. Journalists who pressed too hard were banned in what he called temporary timeouts. Entire accounts were erased at the flick of his digital switch. The contradictions were glaring. Musk, the self-proclaimed defender of free speech, was, in reality, Musk the gatekeeper, deciding whose speech mattered and whose did not. He reveled in trolling politicians, mocking regulators, and taunting critics with memes, as if governance itself were a game. His tweets were not just opinions, they were weapons, fired recklessly into public discourse with the confidence that his wealth would shield him from consequences, and shield him it often did. When regulators raised concerns about safety or labor conditions, Musk brushed them off as bureaucratic nonsense. When asked about oversight, he smirked, cracked jokes, or shifted blame. Again and again, he wielded his billions as if they were proof of virtue. If he was rich, he must be right. If he was powerful, then rules should bend to him. It was this pattern that made his appearance before Congress more than just another hearing. Musk wasn't used to being told no. He wasn't used to being forced into accountability. Oversight was a nuisance. A distraction from the empire he believed was too important to question. But arrogance has one fatal flaw. It blinds you. It convinces you that the storm ahead is nothing more than a passing cloud. Musk strutted into the chamber, certain that his name, his empire, and his myth would carry him through, believed as always that he could sneer, mock, and grandstand. His way out of scrutiny, what he didn't see was the trap of his own contradictions. He couldn't reconcile the Elon Musk who preached free speech with the Elon Musk who silenced dissent. He couldn't reconcile the visionary who sold himself as a champion of democracy with the mogul who shrugged off democratic institutions. He couldn't imagine that anyone, least of all, a congresswoman, he dismissed as a minor voice, could cut through his armor. And yet, that is exactly what was about to happen, because the arrogance that made Musk untouchable was the same arrogance that left him vulnerable. His dismissiveness, his trolling, his belief that money equals invincibility, it all built a paper throne. And the more he leaned on it, the weaker it became. In that hearing room, before the eyes of the nation, Musk wasn't the genius billionaire. He wasn't the hero of space travel or the savior of electric cars. He was something far smaller. A man who thought wealth excused arrogance, who thought power excused hypocrisy, and who thought intimidation could silence accountability. The storm was already gathering. He just couldn't see it. But soon, everyone else would. Jasmine Crockett's story begins far from the marble floors of Congress. She grew up in Texas, in neighborhoods where politics wasn't an abstract debate, it was survival. She saw firsthand how laws shaped lives, how justice could be uneven, and how power often belonged to those who could afford it. And she decided early that if she was going to make her way in this world, it wouldn't be through privilege or inheritance. It would be through grit. Long before she ever faced billionaires in Washington, Crockett was a civil rights attorney fighting in crowded courtrooms. Her clients were not Fortune 500 companies. They were ordinary people families fighting eviction, young men facing unfair charges, and workers cheated by employers who thought no one would ever challenge them. She stood by them not because it was easy, because she couldn't stand the thought of injustice being left unanswered. It wasn't glamorous. Her days stretched late into the night. Hours poured over case files in dim offices where the air conditioner rattled louder than the phones. She knew the sting of defeat, the exhaustion of being underestimated, and the quiet nights when it seemed like the system was too big, too rigged, and too stacked against people like her. But those moments only hardened her resolve. Every setback became another layer of steel, every courtroom loss a lesson in resilience. Unlike Elon Musk, Crockett didn't inherit platforms of power. She built her platform brick by brick, case by case, speech by speech. Where Musk flaunted arrogance on Twitter, Crockett learned humility from struggle. Where Musk dismissed oversight as irrelevant, Crockett understood that oversight was the only thing protecting the powerless from the powerful. Musk had billions. She had backbone. And in the long run, backbone can be the sharper weapon. Her rise from the courtroom to the Texas legislature and then to the halls of Congress was not an accident. It was a calling. She was propelled not by ego, but by urgency, the urgency to protect rights to often trampled, to give voice to those silenced, to bring dignity into arenas where money usually drowned it out. In every step, she carried with her the lessons of the neighborhoods she grew up in, the clients she defended, and the people who reminded her that justice is not a luxury. It is a necessity. What made Crockett formidable wasn't just her intelligence, though it was sharp enough to slice through pretense. It wasn't just her passion, though it burned hot enough to intimidate even seasoned opponents. It was her composure. In every battle, she had learned to steady herself, to keep her voice calm even when her heart raced, and to let her opponent's bluster collapse under its own weight. That steel composure, forged through years of sacrifice, became her greatest weapon. There were moments along the way that tested her resolve more than others. The nights she sat in silence questioning whether her work was enough. The cases where clients looked to her with desperation in their eyes, and she had to swallow her own fear to give them hope. The speeches she gave in Texas, where her words were met not with applause, but with resistance, sometimes even hostility. Still she stood firm. Because Crockett understood something Musk never did. True strength isn't measured in money, but in endurance. It isn't about how many followers you command, but how many times you keep standing when the world tells you to sit down. Every doubt, every sacrifice, every uphill climb had prepared her for moments when the stakes would rise beyond her imagination. Now, in that congressional chamber, she carried with her the weight of every courtroom where she had once been dismissed, every late night where exhaustion told her to give up, and every client who had placed their trust in her when no one else would. She carried the memory of her roots, the sound of her community calling for justice, and the unshakable belief that dignity was stronger than arrogance. And there, across the aisle, stood Elon Musk, the man who thought wealth made him untouchable, who thought arrogance could mask hypocrisy. To him, this was just another room, another audience, another chance to dominate. But for Jasmine Crockett, it was something far greater. It was the culmination of every struggle, every sacrifice, every lesson that had shaped her into the woman she was. The clash between them was never just about a billionaire and a congresswoman. It was about two paths, two Americas. One built on inheritance, privilege, and ego. The other was built on struggle, sacrifice, and conviction. One voice raised for domination, another voice raised for justice. And on this day, every trial she had endured prepared her for one line that would silence a billionaire. Elon Musk leaned back in his chair, smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. His voice carried the easy arrogance of someone who had spent a lifetime believing the world bent to his will. "With all due respect, Congresswoman," he said, the words dripping with condescension, "you have no idea how innovation works. Bureaucrats like you are the reason America falls behind. People like me build the future, while you sit here slowing it down." Gasps rippled through the chamber. The jab wasn't just sharp, it was dismissive, designed to humiliate. Musk sensing the stir, pressed forward. He waved his hand dismissively as though brushing Crockett aside, then chuckled under his breath. "Honestly, I'm amazed we're even having this conversation. You don't regulate greatness? Step out of the way and let it happen." The room tensed. Some leaned back, uncomfortable, while others leaned forward, eager to see how Crockett would respond. Musk had turned the hearing into a stage, and his arrogance filled every corner of it. Each interruption, each mocking laugh, and each overconfident barb tightened the air like a wire stretched to its breaking point. Crockett, however, didn't flinch. She sat steady, her hands folded neatly before her, her gaze fixed on Musk. While he barreled through with interruptions, her silence became louder than his words. Every moment he spoke over her, every time he tried to dominate the floor, the audience began to notice the contrast. His arrogance against her composure. Let's be real. Musk scoffed again, cutting off one of her attempts to interject. "If government had its way, we'd still be riding horses. I've done more for humanity in a decade than most politicians have done in their entire careers." It was a line meant to draw applause, but the room didn't react. Instead, a heavy quiet fell. Even those who admired his ambition could feel the sneer in his tone. He wasn't addressing Crockett as a colleague. He was addressing her as an obstacle. The tension became electric. Eyes darted back and forth between the billionaire and the Congresswoman. The committee members stiffened, sensing that the room itself was on the edge of something unforgettable. Staffers paused their note-taking. Cameras zoomed closer. Musk didn't notice. He was too busy basking in the sound of his own voice. And still, Jasmine Crockett waited. Calm, deliberate, almost surgical in her restraint. She let him tower higher and higher, building his wall of arrogance brick by brick. Interruption by interruption, knowing that the higher he climbed, the harder the fall would be. Finally, after another cutting remark, "Honestly, Congresswoman, your questions are beneath me." The murmurs in the chamber grew restless. Patience of the room had stretched thin. Musk leaned forward, confident he had seized control of the moment. But what he didn't realize was that the silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Jasmine Crockett was not cowed. She was loading the moment, pulling the room tighter and tighter, waiting for the precise second when her voice would matter most. Her calm presence drew the audience in. Spectators shifted in their seats, leaning forward as if bracing for impact. The arrogance of Musk's tirade had begun to wear thin, his repetition turning from swagger to spectacle. The chamber didn't need more noise, it needed clarity, and when Jasmine Crockett finally opened her mouth to speak, it wasn't with the bluster of her opponent. It was with precision, with poise, with the kind of authority that doesn't demand the room's attention but commands it. The moment stretched like the pause before a storm. Every eye turned to her. Every microphone waited. Musk, still smirking, leaned back, as though certain he had already won. But when she finally spoke, the entire room shifted. For a moment, the chamber was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights, as Jasmine Crockett didn't move, didn't flinch. She simply stared across the table at Elon Musk, her gaze steady, unbroken. The silence was deliberate and heavy, a silence that dared him to keep talking. Musk shifted slightly in his chair. The smirk that had been plastered on his face just seconds earlier wavered, almost imperceptibly. For the first time that day, he wasn't sure if he was in control. Cameras zoomed in on Crockett's face, her calm expression contrasting sharply with Musk's restless fidgeting. Then, finally, she leaned in toward the microphone. Her voice, measured and sharp, sliced through the still air like a blade. "Mr. Musk," she began slowly, You talk about greatness as though it's something you can purchase. You speak as if progress belongs only to billionaires, as if the rest of us exist simply to applaud from the sidelines. The words landed with, "Wait." A few murmurs stirred among the spectators, as if the room itself was exhaling for the first time in minutes. Crockett continued, her tone growing stronger, each phrase more deliberate than the last. "But let me remind you," she pressed on, "democracy is not for sale. Accountability is not a luxury. And this chamber is not a stage for your ego. It is a place where the people's voice must be heard." She chuckled nervously, trying to wave off her words. "With all due respect, Congresswoman, but Crockett didn't yield. Eyes narrowed just enough to sharpen the moment. Cut straight through his interruption without raising her voice. "No, Mr. Musk. With all due respect, it is my turn to speak. You've had more than enough time to tell us how extraordinary you think you are. Now let's talk about the truth." The murmurs grew louder, almost a ripple of applause building. In the background, the billionaire leaned back, momentarily silenced, as Crockett began dismantling his argument piece by piece. "You call yourself a champion of free speech," she said, her cadence deliberate. "Yet on the very platform you bought, you silence critics while elevating voices that spread hate and disinformation. That isn't freedom, it's manipulation. You talk about innovation, but innovation without accountability is just chaos wrapped in a shiny package. You celebrate disruption, but disruption without ethics is simply destruction." Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing every angle, every flash of intensity in her eyes. Staffers scribbled furiously, knowing this was history in the making. "Mr. Musk, you believe your money entitles you to invincibility. You strut into this chamber convinced that because you can buy rockets and headlines, you can also buy respect. But respect is earned, not bought. Influence does not equal wisdom, and arrogance does not equal truth." Gasps echoed across the chamber. Musk shifted again, opening his mouth as if to retort, but no sound came. His usual arsenal of sarcasm, bravado, and the sly grin suddenly felt hollow against the precision of her words, and then she paused, deliberately letting the weight of her rebuttal settle over every corner of the room. She leaned closer to the microphone, her voice steady but infused with steel. "Mr. Musk," she said, her gaze locked on him with unwavering certainty. "Money can buy you Twitter, rockets, and headlines, but it cannot buy you wisdom." The line detonated like thunder. For a heartbeat, the room was frozen, suspended in silence so pure it was deafening. And then eruption. Applause thundered through the chamber, echoing off the walls, gasps, cheers, and even laughter of disbelief. Phones shot into the air as people scrambled to capture the moment. Hashtags were already forming in real time. The cameras zoomed in on Musk. His jaw tightened, his lips pressed together. Once the billionaire who had never known how to lose, who always found a quip or deflection, sat motionless. He looked, for the first time in recent memory, shaken. Crockett sat back in her chair, composed, almost serene. She didn't need to gloat. The room was doing it for her. Every clap, every cheer, and every camera flash underscored the shift that had just occurred. Did she just say that? One committee member whispered to another, barely audible over the commotion. "She shut him down," another replied, shaking their head in awe. Meanwhile, outside the chamber, the internet was on fire. Clips of Crockett's line flooded Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Comment sections exploded, iconic. The billionaire silenced. She said what we've all been thinking. Within minutes, the phrase "money can't buy wisdom" trended globally. Memes appeared instantly. Crockett with a mic drop. Musk looking stunned back in the chamber. Musk's hands fumbled on the table, searching for papers that weren't there. He cleared his throat, leaned into the mic, but stopped. He had nothing. The one-liners, the smirks, the unshakable bravado, all of it had evaporated. The weight of Crockett's words pinned him in place. She had not just defeated his argument, she had exposed the hollowness of it. And worse for him, she had done it with grace, with composure, with the exact kind of wisdom he could never buy. The applause stretched on, unrelenting. Members of the chamber who had sat stiffly before were now smiling, some nodding in approval. Crockett remained calm, not lifting her chin. basking, simply existing in the authority of the moment. And as the clapping finally softened, the silence returned, not the silence of tension, but the silence of resolution. Musk sat still, visibly shaken, while Crockett's words echoed long after her microphone went quiet. The billionaire, once convinced he could dominate the room, had been silenced. The congresswoman, once underestimated, had claimed the moment. And, as history would remember it, this was not the day Elon Musk humiliated Congress, it was the day Jasmine Crockett silenced a billionaire. The line didn't just stay in the chamber, it detonated across the world like a cultural earthquake within minutes of Jasmine Crockett's mic drop. Twitter lit up with hashtags that spread faster than wildfire. Hashtag Crockett Clapback and hashtag Silence by Truth. Every clip and every angle of the exchange was replayed, remixed, and shared by millions. By the end of the night, Crockett's name was trending globally, not because she had been the loudest in the room, but because she had been the sharpest. The internet rewarded her calm precision and her ability to slice through Musk's arrogance without ever raising her voice. Memes flooded in. One showed Musk's rocket mid-launch with the caption, "Still can't escape this burn." Another featured Crockett dropping a microphone superimposed onto the chamber scene. Late-night shows wasted no time. Jimmy Kimmel replayed the viral clip with his audience roaring at the one-liner. Trevor Noah declared, "That's not just a clapback. That's the Declaration of Independence 2.0. Even Stephen Colbert, known for his pointed satire, quipped, "Elon Musk just discovered that wisdom runs on renewable energy in Jasmine. Crockett is the power plant." Each joke only amplified her moment, embedding it deeper into pop culture. Celebrities jumped on board. Viola Davis tweeted, "Poise, power, precision. That's leadership." Mark Ruffalo called her line the single most honest thing said in Congress all year. Activists hailed it as a turning point in the accountability conversation. Even comedians couldn't resist. Kevin Hart posted a laughing emoji thread with the caption, "Billionaire shut down like a bad Wi-Fi signal." Meanwhile, Musk was trending too, but not in the way he liked. Instead of articles praising his innovation or market moves, the headlines screamed his humiliation. Musk silenced. In Congress showdown. Memes depicted him as a malfunctioning robot, with captions reading, "System error, cannot respond to truth." His defenders tried to rally, but the tide was too strong. Every time someone posted in his defense, replies flooded in with Crockett's. Quote, "Money can buy you Twitter, rockets, and headlines, but it cannot buy you wisdom." The contrast was stark. For Musk, a man used to commanding attention on his terms, the spotlight had turned harsh and mocking. His empire, built on charisma and defiance, suddenly looked brittle when confronted with dignity. For Crockett, it was the opposite. Years of quiet battles and unglamorous fights for justice suddenly crystallized into one viral moment. She didn't just speak truth to power, she embarrassed it. Commentators framed the clash as symbolic. CNN called it the billionaire's first public defeat in his own game spectacle. The New York Times wrote, "Crockett showed that composure, not capital, wins in the arena of ideas." Opinion pieces multiplied, praising her for turning a congressional hearing into a lesson on humility. But it wasn't just news cycles, it was the cultural imagination. Teachers played the clip in classrooms, framing it as a lesson in rhetoric. Activists used it in speeches about accountability. Even everyday people found themselves quoting Crockett at dinner tables, workplaces, and group chats. It became more than a line, it became a mantra. Musk, by contrast, stumbled. His usual strategy of firing off tweets backfired spectacularly when he tried to mock the hashtag Crockett Clapback by posting a meme of his own. The internet piled on with replies. "This isn't SpaceX, you can't launch away from this burn." The more he pushed, the deeper he sank. Meanwhile, Crockett's star rose higher. She wasn't just the congresswoman from Texas anymore. She was the woman who silenced Elon Musk. Political analysts speculated this moment would elevate her influence in ways few hearings ever could. Her calm command of the stage, her surgical strike at arrogance, and her ability to connect to the public made her a hero far beyond. Washington. In the contrast between Musk and Crockett lay the story's moral. Arrogance can dominate headlines, but dignity wins history. Musk had mocked, interrupted, and scoffed, but Crockett had waited, endured, and then delivered a single line that resonated louder than any tweet he'd ever sent by the week's end. The images were clear. The villain, mocked and memed, scrambles to salvage pride. The hero, elevated and celebrated, her words echoing far beyond the chamber's walls. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a parable, one that proved in an age of money and noise, truth still had the power to silence even the loudest billionaire. When the echoes of laughter, applause, and stunned silence finally faded, Jasmine Crockett did something extraordinary. She refused to bask in the moment. She didn't let the spotlight turn her victory into vanity. Instead, she turned to the chamber, her voice steady, her eyes clear, reframed everything. "This isn't about me versus Elon Musk," she said, cutting through the noise. "It's about dignity versus arrogance, service versus ego, truth versus wealth." The chamber stilled again, not in shock this time, but in recognition. Because Crockett had transformed what could have been just another viral moment into a statement of values. A declaration of what kind of nation America could choose to be. Her words carried a weight beyond politics. They cut to the heart of a timeless struggle. Whether greatness is measured by how much power you hold or by how much integrity you carry. Musk had wealth, platforms, rockets, and influence, but Crockett reminded everyone watching that none of those things mean anything. Without wisdom, without humility, without the courage to serve something bigger than yourself. And that was the lesson. For decades, Americans had been told that billionaires were untouchable, that money was the loudest microphone, that influence was only for the elite. But in that chamber, Crockett shattered the illusion. She showed that dignity can't be bought, truth can't be silenced, and arrogance can never withstand the calm fire of conviction. It became more than a clash between two people. It became a mirror for America itself. Which future do we want? One where wealth drowns out truth. One where truth rises above wealth. One where arrogance mocks service, or one where service humbles arrogance. Crockett's composure, her clarity, is a reminder that democracy is not about who shouts the loudest or who spends the most. It's about who dares to stand with integrity when integrity is under fire. And as the cameras rolled, as social media blazed, her message rose above the spectacle. Dignity does not just win debates, defines nations. The moral crescendo swelled not with sound, but with silence. Because in Musk's silence, awkward, fumbling, uncharacteristically, small America saw something greater than humiliation. They saw the truth of their own values reflected back at them. It was not a billionaire's bravado that would be remembered. It was not the arrogance of unchecked power. It was the calm, unshakable dignity of a woman who stood her ground and spoke truth in the face of ego. And in that silence, America remembered it is not the billionaire who defines us. It is the voice that dares to speak truth. In the end, history won't replay Elon Musk's smirk or his stumbles. It will replay Jasmine Crockett's composure. It will echo her words, her calm defiance, and her line that cut sharper than any fortune could shield. Elon Musk was silenced, but Crockett's dignity rang louder, reverberating through Congress, through the internet, through the conscience of a nation. This story wasn't about a single moment. It was about clarity, about the eternal truth that arrogance may dominate headlines, but composure outlasts it. That wealth can buy platforms, but never wisdom. That ego builds empires, but service builds legacies. What Crockett gave us was more than a clapback, it was a reminder that integrity is the real power, that courage is the true microphone, that truth, when spoken with dignity, will always outshine arrogance, no matter how loud or wealthy it appears. And now, that truth belongs to us. If you believe dignity outshines arrogance, if you believe truth always wins, then don't just watch this story, be part of it. Subscribe, share this story, amplify the voices that refuse to be silenced. Because every time we lift them, every time we echo them, we remind America and the world that power doesn't define us, integrity does. Together, we can make sure the voices of dignity never fade. Together, we can turn silence into strength, and together, we can prove, again and again, that truth always wins.